Jerusalem, but wait for the gift my Father promised, which you have heard me speak about. For John baptized with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit." Then they gathered around him and asked him, "Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel?" He said to them, "It is not for you to know the times or the dates the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." After he said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. "Men of Galilee," they said, "why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." God's words for God's people. Yes, he did ascend. 40 days between the resurrection. That is when Jesus ascended into heaven. 40 days, which I've said this different times before, has always been a significant number in the Bible. There's been so many things that use the number 40. We had the 40 days of rain, 40 days and night of rain on Noah's Ark. We had 40 days of Jesus being tempted in the wilderness by the devil. We had 40 years that the Israelites had to wander around aimlessly until their older generation died out because of them being doing numerous things against God, and they had to wait for the younger generation to be able to enter the promised land. So that was 40 years. Well, then there's 40 days again. And so that makes, on our Christian calendar and on our Easter calendar, that makes Ascension Day this Thursday. Okay, because we are in the 5th week of Easter, and so this Thursday. Now there are churches out there that do celebrate Ascension Day. They have actual special services on Thursday night. I have never, in all my years of being here in this church winter, we have never celebrated that. There's many, many churches that do not. They basically give it a little, Jesus crucifixion story, the resurrection story, and yes, they note on the fact that Jesus ascended into heaven, but a lot don't dwell on it or whatever. And I thought there was a lot of interesting or a lot of important things to the ascension that we should look at, and so that is, like I said, at the 40-day mark. Jesus had to ascend to heaven. I mean, it was part of God's plan, first of all, but he needed to, because his presence on earth kept the others from going out and speaking, because as long as Jesus was there, everybody was going to tune into him. And so he wanted to delegate and, of course, send the gospel out to all corners of the earth. And the only way he could do that was he needed to return to the Father, and that was the plan all along. And he had taken that earthly body and had come to earth and walked the earth and gave up his glorified state. But when he returned to heaven, he was able to sit at the right hand of the Father and be glorified and to be exalted. So Luke, who was a doctor and was the author of the chapter of Luke, of the Gospel of Luke, also wrote Acts. And so he ended the chapter of Luke, the book of Luke, he ended it with, of course, the crucifixion story and the resurrection, and he gave a very, very little small blip to the fact that Jesus ascended. But then when he started to write Acts, he got into more detail, and he started the story again with that I told, and he addressed a Theophilus. And from my understanding is that was kind of it's a term, basically like a dear sir or a dear madam. It's like a greeting. And so, because I was kind of confused by that word Theophilus, but that is what it is. And he said, I told you, referring to back to Luke, the book of Luke, I told you about all these wonderful things. Jesus came to the earth, he lived among us, he preached, then he was crucified, he was resurrected, and it brought us to this time. And he stated that Jesus said Do not leave Jerusalem, but wait for the gift my Father promised, for you have heard me speak about. For John baptized with water, but in a few days you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit. So Jesus had told them that they would have a tool, they would have something that they could use to go out and preach. But as often happened, the disciples totally misinterpreted this. They totally thought that this meant that Jesus was going to restore the kingdom of Israel, that he was going to restore. They only thought in Jewish terms. They only thought of the Jews. That's the scope of their feeling at that time. That's what they thought. They were totally forgetting the Gentiles. They were totally, that was Jesus' message all along. I want this message out to all, to everywhere. And so that includes you and I, we're the Gentiles. And he that's what he was trying to convey to them. But they said, they said to him, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And that really, that verse really hit me. As a matter of fact, I said to Zane, just listen to this, because of what's going on right now with Israel. It really, they are fighting for their every existence, and this is the way it's always been. And that's why the disciples said that to Jesus. For centuries, the Jewish people have wanted to be recognized and have their kingdom in Jerusalem and Israel, knowing that that's the plan, whatever. They just thought it. So of course the disciples, first thing they thought was, that is what Jesus means by this, that we're going to restore Jerusalem. And Jesus said back to them, he didn't really answer that question, because the fact of the matter is, they were given the King of all kings. The Jewish people were given the Messiah. He was there. He walked among them. He talked. What did they do? They crucified him. Okay, so Jesus knew it was not the time, that was not the time that Israel would be restored, because they had already had the opportunity with him there, and they just denied him. And after he was resurrected, they still denied him. And even as the disciples went out and started preaching, they actually went more in the Gentile route, because the Jewish people were still being very stubborn and still non-believing. And there's many factions of Jews today now that still believe Jesus was only a prophet. He was not the Son of God. So that is really the history behind that. And so what he did say to them was, though, it is not for you to know the times or the dates the Father has set by his own authority. And we all know that. We know that, but yet, how many times do you see billboards? The end of the earth, is coming on, June 23rd, whatever date, or these other little groups that form around the country, and they say, oh, we know whenever Jesus is coming back. We know. No, nobody knows. Absolutely not. Jesus himself doesn't know. That information is totally held by God the Father. And it is at his discretion and his will, and none of us know that. And so that's what Jesus was telling them. It's not for you to wonder or ponder, because when Jesus does return, yes, Israel will be restored, and all, Jerusalem will be restored. So that is what they were asking. They thought that was now, but it was not, and it was not the time, and it's only ever God's time. Everything that happens in our life is only ever in God's time. So that's something we need to always just know without any doubt at all. And then Jesus went on to say, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And so he was telling them to just wait. Just wait. And actually they've been waiting. Since the 40 days, okay, of the time after the resurrection, they were waiting in the upper room. They were waiting because they really just weren't sure what to do. They were absolutely not sure what to do. And when last week we did when Jesus regained Peter's, totally forgave Peter, in other words, for all the denials, and whenever that happened, and he was little by little over those 40 days, when he'd make his appearances, he would give them little bits and pieces. And of course, he had told them even before he was crucified that he had to return to the Father. He had told them that he had to die. He told them he would rise again. He told them all those things. But it seemed like each and every time every one of those happened, they had an element of surprise. It's like, oh, like they just like they never even knew that it was supposed to happen. But he was telling them, and he had told them that, and because there are other scriptures previous to this, that he tells about this spirit that will come to them. And that will be what we know is the rest of the Trinity. We have the God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And they will receive the Holy Spirit, and that will actually be 10 days from this time. That's what is known as Pentecost. And that completes basically the whole Easter season. But that is what they are to be waiting on. That's what Jesus told them. You will receive help from above and be able to spread my gospel. And that's what he wanted, was to spread it as far and wide as that he could. And he says to the ends of the earth. Now, for the original disciples, the ends of the earth was probably more to Rome and to whatever, but what they did and the seeds they planted then went on and perpetuated and went on and on. So as he was saying this, okay, and I try to envision this in mind, because as he's saying this, he was then just slowly started lifting up from the earth. And it's just like a wind. Like, have you ever been part of a balloon launch or part of a when they launch the lighted lanterns or anything like that? You've never been part of that, and they just kind of, and even kites, even though kites are held by a string. So I'm talking about something that just goes, or if you let off the string of your kite, it goes, and it just floats. And it just goes around, and you just stand and you stare up into the sky. You're just watching it go. And that's how I envision this. Jesus just very slowly, like he was shot like a rocket. He just went and slowly went up into the heavens. And there again, the disciples were surprised. Like they had been told it was going to happen, but yet when it did, it was just like, and they just stood there and they watched. And they watched, and pretty soon, as with the balloons we would watch or anything, they disappeared into the clouds. And there's significance to that, to the clouds, because God gave he gave the Israelites a big pillar of clouds so that they would know how to get to the promised land. Clouds are a very significant thing, and the clouds just took Jesus, and they could no longer on the ground see him. But yet, they still stood there, and they still watched. Because they really weren't even sure, what does this mean now, Did they feel a sense of, oh boy, now what do we do? Or did they know, okay, yes, this is what Jesus was talking about, but yet they just stood there and kept looking. And as has happened many times throughout the Bible, when appearing to Mary, appearing to his resurrection, throughout a vision of two people in glowing white. So we just assume that those are angels. We just kind of know they are angels. They appeared there, and they basically said to the disciples, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." So more or less, they were saying, why? Why do you keep looking up to the heavens? And honestly, I think probably if I had been standing there, I probably would have been doing the same thing. I mean, I think that would have been such a sight to behold, and such a feeling of, well, he has returned to heaven. He's returned to the Father, just as he said he would. But the angels were there basically saying to them, okay, he's gone. Now, he told you to wait. You need to wait. You need to proceed. You need to move forward now. Now the ball's in your court, basically. Now you need to do what Jesus had wanted all along, what he required from you all along, what his whole 3 years of ministry was all about. It was all leading up to this point of, yes, he's returned to the Father in his glory. He'll sit at the right hand, and now it is left in the very capable hands of the disciples. And just like I said at that beginning song, they made the choice to stand with Jesus, and that's exactly what they were going to do. but they first had to wait, and they had no idea when the Holy Spirit was going to come, but they just had to wait because that's the orders they were given. But they knew what they had to do then. They knew, and they were empowered, and they will be really empowered once the Holy Spirit descends upon them. And that's exactly where we are. We sit in the exact same seats as the disciples. We have the Holy Spirit. It is here. We have it. We are empowered by it, and we also need to do the same thing. We are, just as they reached and they ended up, many of them ended up being martyrs for Christ. They ended up dying for the cause. Some of them did die a natural death, but the words and everything that they imparted upon everybody is what then just grew. And this book of Acts is a history lesson. So if you ever just read through the book of Acts, it is absolutely pure, truthful history of, it's not really preachy, it is actually history, and it tells the beginnings of Christianity, where we started, where we came from, and then where we are all going.